Hello and welcome to the second episode of Pillow Talk with Core. My name is Eamon and I'm the Client Solutions Director at Core, and I'll be your host today. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Lyons, the Security Product Marketing Manager for Modern Workplace at Microsoft. Nick, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Eamon.
Nick, before we kind of get into the main body, it'd be great to hear a little bit about yourself, your background and what you do at Microsoft.
Certainly, yeah. So Nick Lyons, as you say, Security Product Marketing Manager for the Modern Workplace within the UK. What that actually means and what the role is fundamentally three things. There's the idea of the business management. So I look after business, I look after E5 metrics and all sorts of fun stuff like that. There's evangelism, so actually talking about, which is the thing I love, talking about security, talking about how to make people more secure throughout their digital transformation. And finally, the go-to-market, so making sure that the field, including all of our partners such as Core, are really ready to go out there and deliver and make all organizations more secure.
Okay, excellent. Before we spoke, I was looking at your LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed that your byline, which I love, says helping secure every digital transformation. I know we've often joked previously that digital transformation is a dirty word. But it's not often I see where people put that as part of the kind of emphasis. Security sometimes gets a little bit missed in the mix of a digital transformation. So I think it's great to see it in there, and I think we all agree that it is the fabric of ensuring a successful digital transformation. So clearly that's important to you.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, exactly as you said, for me, you cannot take what you're doing and transform it and assume you can protect it using the same security approach. You've got to consider what you're doing. I mean, fundamentally, when a shift to the cloud, you're taking your identity and putting it out open in the cloud and saying, come and have a go. Fundamentally, you've got to take a different approach. You've got to look at how you're going to protect your identity, your data, your infrastructure, your network. And with a digital transformation, you're changing your digital state from being something that you, as an IT department or an organization, had your hands around and could control into, the cloud, someone else's computer, if you like. And you've got to change your security posture. You've got to change your strategy to really look at how you're going to secure this new way of work, which we'll come on to in a minute, I'm sure. Yeah. But fundamentally, you've got to consider security as part of transformation.
Okay, cool. And as you say, we will definitely come back to kind of development as we go through. Just for context, Nick, the focus of this episode is Core's recent report. We actually only launched a week ago on the sleep patterns of IT professionals. And in particular, today, I think what we want to look at is the challenges and the stresses that security places on IT professionals, how that affects their sleep patterns and their work-life balance. For those kind of joining the episode today, the report is an independent report that Core carried out with an organization called Savanta. For those that are interested in kind of the mechanics of the report and how we executed the report, it's in the report itself and it's on our website. For me, this is the first time Core have done a report like this. It is very much a first, and I was taken aback by some of the stats. I think we have some perceptions about what we expect to hear from IT professionals. So some very, very interesting stats, and I highly recommend that you download the report. We will be providing on screen right now a link to where you can get the report, and it's also available on Core's website. I think looking at the report and some of the key challenges, it's very obvious that IT professionals are really concerned about security, and it's one of the top priorities that's keeping them awake at night, causing headaches and so on. In my role as Solutions Director at Core, I get to spend quite a bit of time with senior IT leaders, CIOs, and I always cheekily at the end of kind of first meetings or kind of review meetings ask that question: what is keeping you awake at night? And it's pretty consistent. I always hear security is number one. I think the way it comes back to me, though, is quite interesting. Some say it's just they're generally quite fearful of when the next attack is, where it's coming from, and they're worried about just that complete openness to where the attack is coming from. For me, though, the really interesting part was some CIOs come back with, they know they've got the tools, they've got the tech, but they're concerned about consistency and across the platform, are they configured properly? So if you take that in context to our report, 38% of those responded say they really are struggling to sleep based on stress of work. Staggeringly for me, a quarter say they get less than 4 hours sleep a night. And the job is just too stressful. Nearly a third say the job is very, very stressful. But I think context for today, the standout stat was 54% security is their number one concern. For me, a lot of our customers, for the last 2 or 3 years, the security landscape has changed. We've moved away from perimeter security. We moved towards zero trust. So the threats everywhere. We're protecting both inside and outside. And we're having to ensure that we're embracing and applying protection everywhere. So I think the question buried in there, Nick, to you is, as you see it, what are the main challenges? I mean, it's a pretty broad question, but what are the main challenges that organizations are facing from an IT security perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. The report is fascinating, particularly the one that scares me, like you, is that less than 4 hour statistic. That's genuinely worrying, because I certainly can't function on that sort of sleep. But for me, the broad context here of the main challenges, it's still this idea of digital transformation. Those words, again, I'm not going to apologize for using them, because IT departments hate them, but absolutely is the way that everyone is being forced to transform. With that forced change comes a change to security, and this general feeling that people are not knowing and unable to understand the impact of the changes that they're being forced to make. So to put a bit of context from what we see at Microsoft around that, Satya Nadella in the recent earnings call has said we've seen 2 years of that DT word in the last 2 months. So the pace of change is definitely exciting, is one way to say it. Interesting, but absolutely challenging, particularly for security. For every organization that's going through these changes right now, and I realize I've switched context here to talk a little bit about what's happening right now, but I think this is very relevant. Every organization, and I do mean every organization, understands that they need to consider security and compliance as well when they're moving to this new way of working that we're all working on. And one thing I do find offensive is when any organization starts shouting, saying, hey, you're transforming, you need to consider security. That to me just strikes of arrogance, because everyone who's doing this change right now, every organization that's trying to survive and trying to keep their business going, understands they need to talk about security and they need to address that security. They don't need someone shouting at them to say, hey, what are you doing about security? They know they've got to address that. I think just for context there, it's really the priorities have changed, and the priority of security is not gone away, but it's very difficult to get that voice in. I think that's causing even more stress right now. The challenge ultimately we're seeing is the change and the complexity that comes with this security approach that keeps bolting on more and more and more solutions to address a threat, whatever's in the press, whatever's the latest and greatest threat, rather than looking to say strategically, what are we doing and how are we looking to protect, detect and respond to threats across everything. And I think the second thing that's causing a load of stress for people is you've got all these different systems, you've got all these different domains that you're looking after in these different perspectives, and each one of those is producing alerts saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, and every system is shouting loudly. It just means that trying to find what the actual real problem is versus the mundane, someone's logged in from a different area or whatever, and taking the time to sort out a proper considered attack against just the noise and the hubbub of running a security operations center, and to join that up across those different silos is ultimately just massively time consuming and hugely frustrating, because there's better ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think jumping on that last point, and maybe a couple of the points you made there, the bringing together of things will actually come back to maybe in a small while, but I think that's one of the kind of key strengths that we see running a security operations center effectively on top of Microsoft technology. And that, the statistic that you touched on in terms of the amount of transformation, I know if we just pick on Teams alone, a stat I read over the weekend is 75 million daily users. and we're heavily involved with a lot of public sector organizations about getting them rapidly deployed. But again, the CIO level or the CISO level are saying, but does that now mean my domain of security is now even more stretched? Am I going to have more data protection issues? And for me, the ability for us to use DLP and all those kind of technologies on top of Teams is really where we need to stress. So, we have a rapid enable program. We can still get teams out there quickly, but we don't have to scrimp on security while we do that, I think is one of the messages we're trying to say, which I think kind of leads me into my next question, which is, we are in crazily changed times. That has to increase security challenges. We've loads of remote working, but we still want to offer flexibility and enforcement as we go about the kind of changes we're going through. So I think from your perspective of what you're seeing on the ground, how are organizations adapting to stay secure, 100% secure, whilst we have employees working from home? And, what has to be the future? We're going to see a lot more people work from home when this thing passes through. So how are you seeing organizations adapt?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm just going to challenge you a little bit on something there. This idea of 100% secure, really interesting to see what that means and just work out what we mean when we say 100% secure, because often people think that means no breaches. That means that you've got to assume, well, you start off and say, we've protected everything, we're all good, we've got everything patched and we're up to date. Well, that's not 100% secure for me. I think there's a quote from Robert Mueller that came out in 2012 that's still so relevant, which is that there's two types of organization, those that have been breached and those that will be. So security doesn't mean 100% secure, just doesn't mean stopping things getting in. For me, it really means closing that window between infiltration, detection, and response and remediation. So going back to the main challenges we outlined before, you need a security approach that really works everywhere, that leverages this automation, AI, and machine learning to deal with that alert tsunami that you're getting. And you need to join up across identity, devices, data, infrastructure, and apps. And yeah, you can see that those little point solutions that you're dealing with are just going to cause more gaps and more challenges, I think. We've mentioned this before, work has changed rapidly and security needs to change too. And you mentioned it in the starting point, actually, but for me, zero trust is your starting point. You've mentioned that the perimeter's changed. You cannot just build higher and higher walls to protect things. You can't protect the perimeter when there is no perimeter to protect. You need to evolve, and that's having to happen rapidly. So zero trust policy, absolutely, that's the way to go. Ensure you're protecting, but detecting, responding breaches too. I think the other thing as well is everyone's looking to the IT department for security, and for me that's wrong. We need to help, and this is a massive, massive challenge for society as a whole, which sounds particularly grandiose, but the problem comes down to passwords. We're all using digital services now. We are all completely reliant on passwords, and passwords fundamentally are absolutely awful things to use if you're a human being. They're great for computers, they're awful for humans. So people use the same password, use the same one everywhere, recycle it when they need to, maybe have a series of 3 different passwords, one for high security stuff that gets. Anyhow, I think everyone understands the challenge of passwords now. And if people do one thing as a result of this, absolutely go and read the report, absolutely work out how you're going to do your security posture. But right now, pause this video, and if you haven't turned on multi-factor authentication on your primary email for personal use, for your social posts, for your email is the big one, social's the next big one. Do that at home, and then go and shout at your IT department and ask them why you haven't got multi-factor authentication going on at work. So that is the big thing for me. Protect identity. You protect identity through multi-factor authentication. That kills 99.9% of the attacks that we see. That's the simple go-do.
There's probably so many points I'd love to pick up on that, Nick. A couple of small things. For example, MFA. It's such a simple thing. Across a customer base. Not just ours, but talking to other partners. The statistic of those that have turned on a MFA, which kind of goes back to my comment earlier when CEOs say they have the tech, but they're not sure if it's configured. Sometimes it's as low as 20-30% actually having MFA turned on. Interestingly for me, I've got a couple of kids. They're all being very quiet in the background today, by the way. They've been warned. But they're all working from home, they're schooling from home. They're all on devices, all surfaces, I'm glad to say, but they're all using Windows Hello, and it's so native to them. It just blew my mind the first week, a couple of weeks ago, when I saw all the kids using Windows Hello, and I thought just implicitly they understand, or they don't care. It's just part of the psyche of how they use the technology, and I think that's a culture shift that we kind of need to see as well. So certainly passwordless is where we want to be. Just so moving on to the next question, and I think this for me again is probably, it's hard to do this discussion without considering the current crisis. And I should point out, which I didn't earlier, that the report we did, by the way, was pre the crisis. So, some of the context there might be slightly different. But, I was talking to a recent colleague, a very senior security professional based in the city. And he put a very blunt, very, scary thought really on what's changed for him in the last 6 weeks alone. And he put it down to what's keeping him awake at night is that his budget's pretty much gone. He's very little resource. He's got some furloughed staff, and he personally is on a 20% pay cut. So he said, Eamon, that's the reality of what I'm dealing with. I've got to still be as secure as I was 2 months ago, but doing it with a lot less. So again, from your perspective, your thoughts, maybe even with that comment in mind, what are the challenges in that 2020 now will put on the roadmap for organizations whenever post happens to be, but post current crisis?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. It's foremost on almost everyone's minds. I think what's happened has put a spoke in the wheels of every business, no matter if you're already enabling remote working and you've been doing this for years, like we have, for example, or whether this is something that's brand new to you and you've suddenly been forced to adopt a cloud infrastructure which you've been resistant to before. What we've done, I think, is quite interesting here as Microsoft and particularly the security team, is we've pivoted here, and the security marketing team, I should say, actually, we've pivoted here to ensure that we're doing everything to start off from a position of empathy, which sounds like whale song and soothing music, but I think we need to understand what every one of the organizations out there is facing right now, and do what we can do to help them recover and get that resilience with what they already have. So exactly to your point, where people are deploying, a handful of the security stuff that they've already got, they're not turning it on or whatever. It really is, our focus now is really about helping people to use what they've got, get more secure with what they've already got, and really get the cyber hygiene basics for the cloud right. For us, it's about secure remote working. So that's phase one of our response, is crisis response and helping people to get that secure remote working. We're trying to evolve some more security posture to embrace cloud security tools for what are the new cloud workloads for them. Some people have taken a quick fix to say, well, actually, we're going to say everyone's office, everyone's home office should be an extension of what we have in our office right now. So what we're going to do is route every piece of traffic that's coming from accessing work through VPN, and we'll use our on-prem security and compliance tools to make sure we do everything we can. And that simply doesn't work. You get so much stress in the IT department. You get so much stress in the network department. It just is the wrong approach. You need to stop and say, hang on a minute, we've got a different workload here. We need to protect it in a different way. It's not using email on-prem. This is something that's radically different. And again, use the example of Teams there. How can we help people to use what they've already got to protect Teams? And again, multi-factor authentication, please just do it already. But then conditional access, which people probably likely already have. What I'm saying there doesn't mean there's no place for VPN, absolutely not. But it does mean that we need to help people to really understand, and a load of this is education, to say, well, actually, it's not just a question of enabling a workload in a new office. This is a different approach you need to take. Once we've got past this sort of now what, this crisis response, we're into the now what phase, as we look on what's not only the new normal, which we're in now, but the new normal, which in my view, and I don't think it's going to be like life was 4 months ago, and it won't be like life is right now. Our view here is that this is the right time to look at simplification and the value return from your security stack, which will mean continuing to help organizations understand what risks they now have and how those risks have evolved, and also how the bad actors have evolved their approach to try and take advantage of the situation that everyone finds themselves in, what the threat landscape is, and how they should consider not only the tools they're using, but really take this point as a inflection point to stop and consider their strategy and their overall security posture in the new norm. There's been a real increase in managed security service providers right now, with analysts predicting that this is going to outpace parts of the security market by quite a way. And I think that's only going to accelerate as we see people realize that their core business isn't, security. It's not endpoint detection and response. It's actually doing their core business. And this sort of stuff, yes, it's a risk, yes, it's a cost, but there's better ways of doing things than just continuing to try and do what you were doing, but in a vastly different scope.
Yeah. And interestingly, just pulling on a couple of quick points you made, and where we've seen the change, and I'm frankly hoping it will be a change that will continue. When we look at, you mentioned MFA, and I'm certainly on the same bandwidth. It's such an easy thing, but interesting, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, Nick. A number of our customers will say to us, the worry they have with something like MFA is how intrusive it can be, and so on, but not realizing that with cloud apps, with conditional access, that we can be more controlled about when we use it and how we use it and all those kind of key things. We've seen a massive uptake in the last 2 weeks with our security teams on customers who, both with cloud app security and conditional access, how we've started to look at, clearly people are bringing their own devices, all the kind of key things that have, whether we like it or not, have been forced upon us. So I think for the better, people have realized that this technology works, it works well, it just needs configuring, get it in place, get your policies in place, and you're up and running. So if there's a small positive on that side, it's the embracing of the technology that I would suggest a lot of our joint customers already had. Now it's about kind of putting it in place. So moving on to the next question around, I think particularly some of the tech, and I just wanted to get your view really on some of the tech that Microsoft provide under the covers. And I think one of the key kind of context of this question is, Microsoft are recognized now as a security leader and a security company, maybe not something they were thought of maybe even just a couple of years ago. So back in March, Forrester recognized Microsoft as a leader in the EDR, the endpoint detection and response wave. And Joseph Blankenship, one of the senior research directors, actually went further, and I'll quote him. He said to security pros that they really need to take the tinfoil hat off and realize that Microsoft is a security company now. So, they're big statements from people who probably wouldn't have made those statements a couple of years ago. For me, I think if you kind of rip the kind of covers off and look what's under that, the reason, certainly borne out by the report from Forrester, is that the 4 pillars of MTP, Microsoft Threat Protection, namely Defender from an endpoint perspective, Office 365 from a collab and email, Azure ATP from the server and ID, and then MCAS from a shadow IT and apps. You put them together. I think you mentioned yourself a wee bit earlier about kind of the multiple domains. We now have one domain, what is frankly a leading offering, not just us saying that, but kind of the marketplace saying this is pretty unique, and it's really empowering SOC analysts to do their job. So again, how do you think the technology from Microsoft supports and empowers SOCs, particularly from connecting to our report? How do we take that stress away? They've got more responsibility, but the technology's there. How do you think that is working for them?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and this is, to be honest, this is something that's got a load easier in my job for the past 2 years. Having that, exactly to your point, having Forrester say, look, it's not just Microsoft shouting about this stuff. We've invested billions over the past few years in security. This is now leading, and Gartner have evaluated us as in the Magic Quadrant and as a leader in the top 5 security Magic Quadrants as well. So it's not just Forrester. But I think the biggest thing that this is doing, that the solution is doing, is it's helping to get rid of that alert fatigue and helping SecOps professionals and security professionals do more with less, which I know it's trite, I know it sounds like marketing, but the truth is actually behind this as well. This is where the power of a platform comes in, exactly to your point, to join together these different perspectives, to just say, right, we've seen something's happened, something's got in somewhere. And again, we've got quite a few talks that go through the attack chain saying, well, something's got in via email, lateral movement started, you start to see past the ticket or past the hash being used, which are old but still in use. You've started to see people bouncing around to try and elevate their permissions. You've started to see people look to see what data they've got access to and how they could exfiltrate it. And the great thing is, you look at how that appears in an alert in Microsoft Threat Protection. You see there's a medium alerts come in saying, we found this on a machine which came from this mail. We've purged those mails. This person's identity was potentially compromised. We've taken them through MFA and a password reset. And you've just all of a sudden got rid of what was 25 different alerts across 4 different systems, and it's been automatically remediated. So for me, that's where the power is. It's getting rid of that alert fatigue and automating the mundane, making those connections and actually remediating automatically. You'll hear a lot of marketing from Microsoft talking about the power of the intelligent security graph, and that underpins all these solutions. I mean, you'll see every security vendor talk about the signal that they get a day, and we now see 8.5 trillion signals a day across identity, across everything from Bing, updates, scans, all of the different stuff, virus scans, for example. We see 8.5 trillion signals. That is mind-boggling. But the intelligent bit is where you have these machine learning algorithms going over, seeing what's happening, and trying to spot anomalies, remediate, but then correlate. Actually say, this happened on identity, this happened on the machine updates, this is happening here, there's a consolidated attack. And where it can remediate, it will automatically remediate, as the example I've just given earlier. But where it can't, it will build together an investigation package and present that to the SecOps or the analyst that's got to deal with this, saying, here's what's happened, this is what's happened on the machine, these are the identities that are involved, this is the network that this came from, this is anything and everything to do with this particular alert. I've got as far as I can, you go and do it. So I think that's absolutely trying to drive down and help people get past that alert fatigue, because it's just getting rid of the mundane, and it's helping people to focus on where they need to focus.
Yeah, I think we're, from a purely practical point of view, Nick, we're seeing that. We run SOC on behalf of a number of our customers. I think the prescriptive nature of the remediation and the ability to remediate, that and across domain. There's loads of statistics which I won't go into now, but there's so many statistics out there about where threats come from and where they end up. And the old adage, certainly we used to see, is buy multiple tools from multiple vendors so you've got more coverage, where we feel that just creates more gaps. You've got gaps in different domains. Again, Forrester's comment was, it's the most comprehensive suite, and that was a pretty broad statement. They had a lot of vendors on their wave, and the big statement that stood out to me was, it is the most comprehensive end-to-end suite. As a SOC and as an organization, managed service provider helping SOCs, SOC analysts, what we feel is really interesting is the ability for that. Take multiple events, put them into incidents, and allow us to look at the behaviors. So yes, we'll remediate what we can. You said actually back in the intro, which I thought was very interesting, Nick, it isn't about 100% security. Stuff will get in, and we've got to recognize that. But it's getting in and then being able to react relatively quickly and closing that problem down. So, certainly we're seeing genuinely with customers who've kind of embraced the technology, configure the technology, that they're getting the best of both worlds. They're getting a bit of more sleep because the day-to-day is working okay, but now they're focusing in on, let's look at where the threats really are and how we can kind of, whether it's better patching or whatever the kind of end outcomes need to be.
Yeah, actually, just to riff on that, a point as well, a point you made there, which was this idea of no such thing as perfect security and breaches will go in. I think that's something that can also help to really help security professionals or people responsible for security to sleep at night, knowing that when they get breached, because everyone will be, or when there's an alert or whatever, there's not going to be a blame associated with that. And I think right now there's a big fear in the industry and across the community in general that you don't want to go and find problems with your security because someone will say you've done it wrong. I think evolving the position and the consideration that security is given to say, actually, this isn't just one person's problem. This is, as mentioned, it starts off at passwords and that every individual's got and goes up from there. It's something everyone needs to take responsibility for. And there needs to be this acknowledgement that everyone is doing their best. And when something happens, we need to look to a culture of, from the airline industry for, right, how do we learn from this? How do we do a constructive analysis to say this is what happened and this is what we're going to put in place to make this better, rather than saying you failed because you let something in. And I think that evolution of culture and that evolution of the position of security and the approach to security within an organization will also massively help to get rid of stress and help people to sleep at night.
Yeah. I think for me, this is the nub of where we can help and where the technology can help. I mean, I have, without naming names, I have two almost polar examples across maybe the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even slightly longer, of one organization many years ago who we provided some desktop support for, who unbeknownst to them, had a threat that came in through a phishing website. We believe we don't know in the end, but it did one of the simplest things. Once it compromised identity, it then went and changed the auto forwarding route in email. Yep. So unbeknown to them, they were auto forwarding some pretty crazy emails, and they had a genuine financial hit. And that's many years ago. Genuinely, we had a corresponding example in the last couple of years where a customer who has most of the MTP suite. They didn't even realize how simple, but it had spotted what looked like a dubious auto forwarding rule, had notified them and let them look at it. And within a very small period of time, that notification let them stop that. Whereas the other organization many years ago just had no idea that they had that gap. So it didn't fix the problem, but it alerted them that the problem was there and they should look at it. And that to me proves that things will happen, but the intelligence and the technology will help us as security professionals say, how do we close that down, or should we close that down? So I think that's the balance I suppose we want to try and achieve, which I think in itself leads me to my next topic, which is skills in general. So ESG did a report, the Enterprise Strategy Group did a report late last year. I think one of the key things they highlighted that there is a pretty major skill shortage in cybersecurity. 70% of the CISOs said that it was one of their biggest challenge, getting skills and hiring in the kind of security analytics type staff and the operations staff. So based on kind of the recognized skill shortage, how do you think Microsoft and companies like Core, so managed service providers, can help? Because we also recognize that security is an internal thing. Even in Core, our security team are treated like an independent team. They sit outside our service desk. They have authority over the board of Core. So we're very clear about delineation of security. But so where do you think we as technology partners can help our customers?
Yeah, and strangely enough, I don't think the main challenge here is one of technology. I think it's one of governance and orchestration, exactly to your point there. And fundamentally coming to that question we mentioned earlier, which is, what is an organization's core business? What is it that they do that means that they deserve to be in business and have something unique that keeps them going? Is running a SOC part of your core business? For Core, yes, absolutely. You're providing that service to other people, but is that something that a manufacturer needs to care about? I don't know the answer. It may be, may not be, but I'd probably come down on the answer of may not be. I realise that's quite arrogant to assume that, but yeah, you'd have to question why they're doing that. 10 years ago, people were questioning whether they should be running Exchange servers. Is that part of their core business? Email, absolutely part of your core business. Security, yes, absolutely part of your core business. Is it something that you need to manage yourself? Again, it's a question that we need to help people to ask in the right way and respectfully. I think there's this idea of really using the disruption that's happening now as a positive moment to help question what we're doing with security, what everyone is doing security, and you know, simple things like how do you evolve from merely understanding what's going on there and monitoring into this proactive orchestration. I think a fantastic example of this is the trend recently that's seen the rapid evolution of SIEM tools into security orchestration, automation, and remediation. So SOAR tools, where, you know, if you've got a SIEM, great, well done, but what's it actually doing for you? And that's where SOAR provides the answer. Automation and AI really do help here, but I think that it comes back to saying, right, what is fundamentally your strategy to security? How are you approaching this, and how are you making sure that you understand your threats, you are consistently evolving to address those threats, and fundamentally, is it something that you need help with? Because if you do, there is now a whole ecosystem that's out there. This expertise in security, and exactly to your point, you know, it's hard to acquire, it is expensive to acquire. Once you've acquired it, keeping people happy, keeping them skilled up, keeping them interested, it is really hard, and making time to build people's skills when you've acquired them. You know, is that your core business? Is that what you want to spend your time doing? Or is there a better approach that leverages the investment that Microsoft have made, the investment that Core have made, the investment that, you know, the whole of the industry is making to try and better secure every organization?
So as business need to look at the various security threats, the data needs in terms of GDPR, so sector-based regulation, what KPIs should business look to in this changing environment, and what looks good, what's not so good, and what's frankly bad?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I'd love to say there's a silver bullet to answer this, but I think it comes down to individual organizations and what they're doing to evolve their approach to security and risk. And throughout this conversation, I think you've seen me say security is never perfect, and the idea of always looking for someone to blame because you've seen this KPI go up where it should be going down, or vice versa, is never helpful. And it just means that people stop looking and testing their own responses for fear of being labelled a failure. So, you know, I'd say you should be looking to evolve to ignore the number of breaches, which, yeah, I can see that ending up as a headline somewhere. But, you know, rather than focusing on that, look at the time to remediate. I'd also say that some metrics that you need to consider, you absolutely need to have visibility on them, but they're not necessarily KPIs. So, as an example, the number of devices being used to access an organization's resource, it's absolutely a useful metric. Is it a KPI that someone should be measured on? No, but it does give you a great view of the magnitude of your estate that's now in scope that you need to secure. Once you know that and you see the trend on it, you can then start to say, well, should this be increasing? Should it be decreasing? And the answer is, honestly, it depends. But without knowing where you're starting from, it's really, well, it's impossible to set a strategic direction. Going back to trying to answer the question about KPIs, I think time to resolution, it's critical. But to do that, you again need to have this mature approach that doesn't look to blame, but looks to learn. And again, I'd look at it's oft cited, but the difference between an airline industry and well, what happens in healthcare, which is someone is always looking for someone to blame in healthcare, whereas with the airline industry, people can say, right, this happened, how do we learn and how to make sure it never happens again? So yes, time to resolve, but with the necessary culture in place. False positives. This isn't really a measure of someone's effectiveness, but it's a useful proxy for how much time your security stack is causing you to waste. The automatic remediation percentage, again, I'd be looking at that sort of stuff and trying to understand what that means. So there's no, because this is going up, it's good, because this is going down, it's bad. It all needs to be taken in context of the threat environment and the overall estate that you're working with. Of course, things like the number of identities at risk, that absolutely is a KPI that's simple to say this should be driven down. And as we've said before, MFA and conditional access to make that better. There's many different approaches that you can use, but I think the fundamental piece here, and we almost ignored it at the starter, is there are KPIs for security, and even in this hectic times that we're seeing right now, you should be considering what those KPIs are, what you need visibility into, who's owning them, and how you're going to manage them.
Cool, thank you. So I think just to wrap up today, firstly, again, thanks, Nick. Some really great insights into the threats that IT professionals are facing, and I suppose through that the business are facing. Talked a wee bit about some of the mitigation. I think for me, as a Microsoft partner, looking at how Microsoft Threat Protection and Azure Sentinel can come together as a single suite to provide that both Microsoft and non-Microsoft protection that we're looking for. Some of the kind of quick points that I'd take from what you said yourself today, Nick. 2 years worth of transformation in 2 months is a scary stat, and I think it is what we're seeing, and certainly we're seeing it. Security isn't just for the IT professional, it is everybody in the organization. And I think if you left us no other message, MFA is there, let's turn it on, let's keep our remote devices secure. And certainly that's a message that we're talking to our customers about day in, day out. We've covered quite a few topics here. I just want to highlight, though, that the report from Core really covers an awful lot more useful insights. So please do, if you get an opportunity, we'd like you to download that. Again, the link is on screen as I speak. So listen, thank you for joining us, and many thanks for your time.
Many thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
All right, take care. Bye-bye now.